Yeah, I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. And as a thank you, I will show you one picture that we got last week. We've done that I think nobody has seen yet. So, yes, I'm going to talk about CRS, and maybe just to follow up on what Paul just said. I mean, CRS is interesting and is relevant to this workshop because especially of these two features, Haunamans and Okator. Evidence for volcanism is a little bit elusive in that you have evidence for cryovolcanoes in a few places. We are still trying to figure out exactly the processes involved in the formation of these features and especially the source of these features. So just to set a little bit of background, CRS is large from a geophysical standpoint. It's about almost 1,000 kilometers large in diameter. It's a fast rotator. It has a surface temperature, the temperature relevant for geophysics, which is 155 Kelvin at the equator, and it's much colder at the poles. But for that temperature, we expect ice to flow on some geological timescale, especially if impurities are involved, which I think is the case. Its density is about 2.2 gram per cubic centimeter, which corresponds to a rock mass fraction of about 73%. And a volume fraction of rock, which is about 50%. So there is 50% of the volume which is in water volatiles and 50% in rock form. And that is important because you have this combination of having a lot of rock as a source of heat, radioisotopic heat. There is no tidal heating on CRS, but there is a lot of heat from radioisotopes. And you have a lot of ice, which means that the geology on CRS is very much driven by the behavior or the mechanical properties of ice. And pre-dawn models predicted that there would be extensive aqueous alteration and salt production in CRS, early history by analogy with the permanent bodies of chondrites, the carbonaceous chondrite, which are believed to have been processed early on due to the decay or powered by the decay of aluminium-26. And somebody had a vision about this, and that's Jeff. One of my favorite papers about brine volcanism in the interior structure of asteroids and icy satellites. And I think that this paper is extremely relevant now for CRS. Just a few words about the Dawn mission. Dawn mission was launched in September 2007. Went to Vesta first in 2011, summer 2011, left a little bit more than 1 year later, arrived at CRS in March 2015, and we have been in orbit around CRS since then. Our mission has been extended twice, and we are currently going down. CRS just passed its perihelion, so we were able to observe CRS right after perihelion and search for some changes on the surface, which data we got last week, and we are in the process of analyzing. And currently, Dawn is going down to 35 kilometers with respect to the surface of CRS and especially Okator crater. So we are very excited about that. We will get there on June 9. So stay tuned. We are going to release pictures every day, and especially pictures of Okator crater, as Paul mentioned. We have three key instruments on the spacecraft: a framing camera, which is a very good camera from Germany, a gamma ray and neutron detector, and the Dawn second extended mission is in particular meant to enable high resolution elemental particle sensing with that instrument at a footprint of about 100 kilometers. And then we have a very nice visible on infrared mapping spectrometer from Italy. So now going into the topic of this session, first CRS crosses ice ridge. And that is a very important observation. There are many signs that CRS crosses ice ridge, but I focus on this picture because it's a Jullien crater. It's interesting because we have this glacier feature here, very nice, and we have detection of ice directly on the northern wall, and that ice content has been varying over time. There is evidence of a water cycle, at least between this glacier and the wall. as insolation increases, you have loss, vapor loss here, and redeposition here on the wall. And but that's just one of the many features showing that there is a lot of ice in Cirrus's crust. And something that is more telling is the fact that the gravity and topography data combined revealed that Cirrus is partially differentiated in a rocky mantle that has about a chondritic density of 2.4 grams per cubic centimeter, and a crust that is enriched in volatiles. We are still trying to understand the nature, the composition of the crust, because it is very strong, it's 3 orders of magnitude stronger than ice, but it's very low density. It has a density of, oh, I didn't mention it, of 1.3 gram per cubic centimeter. There is uneven, there is a paper that is coming up and that is suggesting that the density of the crust could be even as low as 1.1 gram per cubic centimeter. So that is really telling us that there is a lot of volatiles in the crust. But it is strong, and this has led us, on the people working with the data on the DAWN team, led us to the conclusion that class traits might be involved in driving the high strength, low density. And we hope that other studies start working with the data in order to confirm or invalidate and propose alternative models for the observations. Last thing for this slide is that the topography relaxation modeled by Roger Fu suggests that there might be a soft layer below a 40 kilometer crust. There is a contrast in viscosity of about 6 or 7 order of magnitude between the crust and the underlying layer. Roger Fu has suggested that maybe it's because there is a little bit of brines left from the original ocean, so a relict ocean. But here we are talking about probably a few percent of brines at most in the mud. So Cirrus also displays a lot of evidence for aqueous chemistry. I mean, first, on a global scale, the surface displays almost homogeneous composition, a mixture of ammoniatic clays, serpentine, and carbonates. There is also a very dark agent. We are trying to figure out its composition. It's probably carbon. There is a paper coming up suggesting there is at least 20% in volume of carbon in the crust. So probably we have maybe amorphous organics. And so this points to a global episode of hydrothermal alteration. Locally, and especially in association with young features and young craters, there are these famous bright spots. Here you have Okator, for which we have some constraints on the composition. We know it's primarily sodium carbonates. There is evidence for ammonium salts, ammonium chloride. There might be other salts, but they don't have a signature in the infrared, so we are not sure. But maybe when we get very close to that feature with the gamma ray and neutron detector in a few weeks, we might be able to sense the chlorine, and that would be a very nice way to confirm some of the geochemical models for the presence of chloride compounds. This composition, it's been found also in the plumes of Enceladus, and it might be representative more generally of bodies that have a large ocean in their early history, and a lot of hydrogen produced from serpentinization. And of course, on Earth, we have a lot of soda lakes in which you find a lot of sodium carbonate because of the involvement of carbon dioxide. And we have organics. I'm not going to talk about the organics. It's not clear to me yet whether or not they play a role in the geology. It's been suggested by, for example, Misha Zolotov, that organics, because they are relatively soft at the temperatures of Cirrus, they might play a role. They might alter the mechanical properties of the crust. Right now, we don't know if this exposure of organics at Ernoutet is just a single site, or there might be many more organics in the crust. So just to show you, we have full mapping with the infrared spectrometer of salt-rich sites at the surface of Cirrus. There are about 15 sites that you see there with their, so that's the signature of sodium carbonate. of carbonate, sorry. And when it's red, it's sodium carbonate. So you have a bunch of sites that show an enrichment of carbonate. In most cases, they are associated with craters or landslides. And that's just a close-up. That's Haulani crater, 34 kilometers large, and it has a mixture of, I think, magnesium carbonate in some places, sodium carbonate in other places, and we've just found hydrated carbonates in that region. And because hydrated carbonates dehydrate on a short time scale, it's possible that they are actually the pristine form of carbonate in Cirrus crust. And so far, we've been assuming that the sodium carbonate is more in a bicarbonate form in the crust, but that model needs to be revised. So this slide is probably out of date now because of that new discovery of hydrated carbonate, but I'm still going to present it. It's what I've been doing here is model the compounds produced by the freezing of a large ocean in Cirrus early history. The composition of the ocean is in equilibrium with the observed composition of the surface, the ammoniated clays and serpentine, and calcium magnesium carbonates. So when we start freezing, we start from water eutectic. When we start freezing the ocean at low pressure, at 1 megapascal, what we find is that, as you can imagine, water ice is going to be the first compound to freeze. But at about 265 Kelvin, sodium bicarbonate is going to be the dominant compound until a temperature of about 245 Kelvin, where you have a bunch of chlorides that condense, and that includes the ammonium chlorides. But the majority of the chloride, at least in this case, should be in the form of hydrohalite, hydrated sodium chloride. So we are not, as I told you, we are not able to see most chlorides on Cirrus' surface, but maybe we can find an increase of chlorides associated with Vocator in a few weeks. And then as a liquid keeps freezing, class threads are going to form and become the dominant form of water. There is a residual liquid at temperatures of about 215 or 210 Kelvin, supersaturated in sodium and potassium chlorides. That's the situation at low pressure. At higher pressure, the situation is different. What we find is that the majority at 273 Kelvin, water goes predominantly in the form of class threads. So class threads, still most of the water, we are still find sodium bicarbonate and the chlorides, but they represent just a few % in volume of the product of freezing. So, but at least this seems to be the composition that we get at low pressure seems to be consistent with the observations with the sodium carbonate and the ammonium chloride. So now I'm going to focus to see how we use this information to understand the origin of some of the of the features on Cirrus' surface that we think to be related to cryovolcanism. So first there is this 4-kilometer mountain that Paul presented. When we first looked at it in a study led by Ottaviano Rouch, we really thought that in order to put a feature like that on the surface of Cirrus, you need a relatively low viscosity, and we need the presence of brines. So we suggested that it doesn't have to be a lot of brines, but we suggested that the material could be lubricated by the presence of a little bit of chlorides at the grain boundaries. Here you have an example of hydrohalite that is partially molten at the boundaries of ice, and that should be sufficient to decrease the viscosity and enable emplacement of the material. We found since then that all the bluish material that you see here is enriched in sodium carbonate. And that is important because sodium carbonate goes in solution only when you have a relatively warm liquid, or at least in order to have a lot of it present, to explain that we have a lot of it present in this feature. So the activity is recent. We are talking about a few tens of million years. And as I said, we need temperature maybe of 245 Kelvin. We need to refine this, but that's a preliminary conclusion. There is a very strong positive gravity anomaly associated with this feature. It's just amazing. You have, I think, 80 milligal of remnant gravity anomaly centered right on Haona Mons. And we're trying to understand this. Sorry, Ottaviano Rouge suggested at the LPSC that maybe it means that there is a source, there is some anomaly at the top of the mantle that is responsible, like topography, sorry, at the top of the mantle that is responsible for the anomaly. I'm not sure about that, or at least I'm not clear about the mechanisms that led. Sorry, I'm not sure about the relationship between the emplacement of this feature and the anomaly at the topography. At the core topography. There is a different explanation that I like better, which is the fact that Ceres's ocean is in the process of freezing, so the interior is undergoing volume changes, and there might be compression of remnant liquid, and locally there could be extrusion of material, but this has not been modeled either. So right now we don't have a good end-to-end mechanism describing the emplacement of Haona Mons. Right now, we think it's a unique feature, at least of that extent. However, I refer you to Max Sory's talk later today, who is going to look at, going to present other evidence for that type of feature. So now I'm going to go to the piece of resistance. So this is Okator crater. As Paul mentioned, you have this dome that is enclosed in a pit. It's a very interesting configuration. Here you have a close-up. We think that the Okator crater is about 20 million years old, but the bright material is only 2 million years old or younger. I mean, with the error bars, it's possible that emplacement of the bright material is ongoing. There might be a recurring eruptive process. I'm not sure about that. We need these upcoming high-resolution images. Hopefully, we can target Okator and know more about that. And we think that there is similarities between this dome and cryovolcanic features and icy satellites. And just quickly, because Deborah Bukowski will talk more about that, I imagine. Just a description of what's going on there. We see there is a diffuse edge here, and that's potentially a clue on the starting, on how the emplacement of that feature started. There is a gradient of composition between the base of the dome and the top of the dome. There is you see the pinkish feature here? It's ammonium chloride. We have direct detection with the infrared instrument, and chlorides tend to become brownish when exposed to UV. So we are sure this is ammonium chloride. So this gradient is very interesting because it points to some fractionation in the magma chamber that is producing that feature, and there might be some filtering of the composition. That is, we have preferential emplacement of certain compounds, and maybe if we wait, in million years, there might be other compounds that appear in the composition across this dome. Here, some focus on the Vinalien faculae, which are on the eastern side of Sierra Alia. You see these two fractures. There is some clear association of these bright spots, at least here and here, with the fractures. And this is a vent. We understand it's a vent, and you see some helicoidal deposition of materials that we think is due to the venting of particles of ice and brines. So, all this. And the Ottaviano Rouge and also Linné have worked on explaining the emplacement of this feature. So probably through the fracture, there's been some upwelling of liquid with help by some gas. We don't need a lot of gas to provide buoyancy on this body, 0.5% or 1%. And once the material is ejected, it's going to do some mantling. And Linné has shown that there is some analogies between the morphology of the Vinalia focola vents and mantling and similar features on Europa. So that's the new picture, color imaging that we got last week of Dantou crater, which is a 126 kilometer large crater, and shows some similarities with Okator. You see this fracture of networks, and you see salts in association with the fractures. So the explanation is that, of course, there was an impact and creation of melt, maybe, or at least introduction of fractures, and that might tap a brine reservoir, and salts are being extruded. And that's what you see here, and there might be some analogy. There is likely some analogy with Okator. We have the infrared data for this, but they are being processed. So soon we will know whether we are dealing with sodium carbonate or something else. And so the big question is, did the faculae at Okator and maybe Dantou and other craters come from a magma chamber? Tim Bolling from SWERI modeled the amount of melt resulting from an impact, and so you see as a function of depth, lateral extent, and temperature. You see that if you have an impactor coming from the asteroid belt with a relative velocity of about 5 km per second, you create a large melt chamber. And because the eutectic is depressed by the presence of salts, if I take a eutectic of 245 Kelvin, the chamber is potentially relatively large. We are trying to now compare this observation to the fact that we have a very large negative anomaly associated with Okator craters. There is likely a relationship between this gravity anomaly and the source, but it's still work in progress. Sorry. I'm trying to make sure I said everything. But so the problem is that we've looked at the evolution with Marques Lewis here at the evolution of the melt chamber and the freezing time scale, and we think it's too short. So what Mark did is he looked at the evolution of, he started from the Tim Bolling's modeling, and with several assumptions on the initial temperature of the melt, and assumptions about the amount of clathrates in the crust, because clathrates have a low thermal conductivity, and they can play an insulating role. And so he assumed up to 60% of clathrates in the crust, which is consistent with the mechanical and the density, the mechanical properties and the density of the crust. And what he finds is that if we stretch the parameters, so relatively warm impact melt reservoir early on and a lot of clathrates, it's possible to push the lifetime of the melt reservoir up to 12 million years. And so there is a discrepancy between the edge of the crater and the edge of the facula that remains. So, and so the bottom line is that an alternative or a complementary source for the Okator facula is from a deep brine reservoir, and that's the model that Linné suggested. So is it possible to preserve a deep brine layer in Ceres, 40 kilometer deep layer, over the long term? I know there is a lot of disbelief in the community that an object like Ceres could preserve liquid until present. And I hear about it all the time. So what I did here is it's a relatively simple model. What I did is I computed the evolution of the temperature, the function of radius, and time on a logarithmic scale, so 0 and present. And I made assumptions on the thermal conductivity of the crust, on the composition of the crust, the relative fractions of ice and salt, silicates and clathrates, leading to different values of the thermal conductivity of the crust. And I also made assumption on the thermal conductivity of the mantle. Here you have an example result. What you see is that if I have a crust with an average thermal conductivity of 1 watt per meter per Kelvin and a mantle at 2, what we find is that the mantle is losing its heat relatively fast, and but the crust is not losing its heat fast because of the insulating effect of the class rate that I assume there. And so if you track the the orange color, it points to the presence of brine in the crust. So if we had liquid early on, you see that liquid is going to remain, even if it's just a couple of kilometers of liquid, it's going to remain until present. And actually we are in a period, just at a period where the liquid, the relict ocean is in the process of freezing. So it's not out of the question to preserve liquid inside cirrus until present, but it's just that it's not a lot of liquid. And so that's just to illustrate, yeah, actually I'm going to focus on this one. So if I just do a small parametric study, and I assume so different values for the thermal conductivity of the mantle between 1 and 2.5 watt per meter per Kelvin, and 2 cases, a conductivity of the crust of 1 watt per meter per Kelvin and 1.5. And then I add another parameter, which is the amount of potassium that was leached from the rock and is in the form of brines, in the form of chlorides in particular. At the base of the crust, what we find is that it's possible to have liquid when the crust has a thermal conductivity that is less than 1.5, and the mantle has a thermal conductivity that is greater than 1, a little bit greater than 1. So that would be the limit if you want a temperature of 220 Kelvin, where you have a little bit of chloride at the base of the crust. So that would be, and then you need also to boost up the heat by having a fraction of the potassium in that brine layer. If you have if you have a thermal conductivity of 1, then what you find is that it's possible for a wide range of mantle conductivity and fractions of potassium in the brine, it's possible to have temperatures greater than 245 kelvins at the base of the crust. So to summarize this, it's possible to preserve liquid inside cirrus if there is a lot of insulating material in the crust. So that's the bottom line, and especially if there are a lot of class rates. Then you can invoke both a deep brine reservoir and a magma chamber, a long-lived magma chamber to explain Nocator facula. The temperature at the crust may be as greater than 220 Kelvin. For that temperature, you have very little liquid, so it's not clear this could explain how Namans, for example, we're talking about 0.1% of liquid in the brine layer left. Cirrus is definitely nearing its full freezing, which I think offers an interesting end member for the study of the evolution of ocean worlds. And locally, I mean, there could be variations in crustal thickness and class rate content. For example, we know that the crust thickness below Anamiplanum, below Nocator, is 55 kilometers. So when we look at a few cases like that, we find that temperature there could be lateral variations in the temperature at the base of the crust by 5 to 10 Kelvin. So just to summarize what we have learned at cirrus regarding brine volcanism, so there is evidence for features that look like volcanism and that involve brines because just of the composition signature. However, the volcanic activity is likely of passive origin. There is not enough heat inside cirrus to drive cryovolcanoes. That's the result from my study. Brian Travis and others have a different approach and find that they could have a lot of liquid. They could have a 200 kilometer liquid layer in cirrus throughout its history, and that layer could, convection in that layer could drive much more activity. So we need to reconcile these two types of models. So upwelling of material relies on the presence of gas for buoyancy, for sure. And I think, Line, you will talk about that in your talk. No, maybe not. Yeah. What I think is going on because Cirrus is freezing is that we have extrusion that is primarily driven by the compression of a magma chamber of the relict ocean or both. So it's really a passive, more of a passive mechanism. And we are still trying to understand Hauna amounts because there is this discrepancy between the composition of the surface and the composition of the source. We need at least 245 Kelvin to explain the composition of Hauna amounts. But I think it's pushing a little bit what is feasible from a thermal standpoint. And so we need to work more on this. Thank you.
Well, this was a thrilling, exciting presentation. So you're in the, you need to do more with less in terms of a lot of interesting geology and cryovolcanism with not much heat. So you either have to try to make more heat or use the heat more effectively. So like lower thermal conductivity would help if your ammonium chloride and sodium carbonate are associated with other salts that are highly hydrated that you're not seeing for some reason. Like maybe at the surface they lose their water of hydration or like something like that. But if you have thick superficial layers of highly hydrated sulfates, or highly hydrated any kind of salts pretty much, then you can push the thermal conductivity down by about a factor of 2, roughly, and that might help.
Yeah, so we are limited just by cosmochemical abundances, by how much salts we can really have. Class rates is what we need to invoke in order to explain the low thermal conductivity of the crust required to preserve brines. But salts by themselves, we don't expect to have more than 15% of salts in volume in the crust.
Hey, Julie. I have a question about the bullet point about a negative gravity anomaly implying a cryomagma chamber beneath Akator. So my two questions were just, right, yeah. Does that imply an interpretation that the magma is emptied, so it's just a void space? And then my second question is, how big of a chamber do you need to get before you can actually see it in the gravity data?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So just to note this, that it's not a clean gravity anomaly. It's broken into multiple points. So, and Anton Yermakov is working on it right now. He has multiple explanations. So first, this anomaly could tell us that the magma chamber has a density lower than the surroundings. So it could be dominated by water, for example, while the crust has a density a little bit higher due to the silicates. That could be a situation where you have this impact, a big magma chamber, the silicates sink, and how you create a contrast between the magma chamber density and the crustal density. I am going to stop here in terms of speculating, because in the next 3 months, we are going to get gravity data with a very high resolution at 35 kilometers around here. And then we are going to answer the question, I think. We are going to have a very nice resolution of the gravity structure.
So I'm unfamiliar with the space weathering environment at Ceres, and how long do those carbonates last at the surface?
So there are two aspects. The hydrated carbonates dehydrate over a time scale of a few million years. It could be much shorter. There was a paper from the University of Virginia that was recently released that suggests that they could dehydrate on a timescale of months or years. I don't think it's consistent with the fact that we see the hydrodecarbonates in at least 2 places right now on Ceres, so let's say million years. Then there is a question of darkening, and Nathan Stein looked at the evolution, like the spectrum of, the distribution of albedo across 300 bright spots on Ceres, and it shows that these tend to darken over a time scale also of a few million years. So there might be way more sites rich in carbonates all over Ceres that we cannot see.
Okay.
Bill? Oh.
Julie, that was a very rich talk. There's clear, you presented a lot of compelling evidence for the presence of salts, carbonates, water ice. Given the input of impact heating, is it sufficient that it could be responsible for all or nearly all of the actual mobile materials on the surface that you see, all of these deposits? And specifically, I didn't quite understand why Ahuna could not be, I mean, I accept that it's come up from underground, but why can't it be completely solid state? Could you repeat?
Yeah, so in his paper, Ottaviano Rouch 2016, he compared the morphology that you would get for a dome like that if it were just a diapir versus some material with, I mean, a cryovolcano, but just with a little bit of melt. And he found that the morphology should be different and that the one observed matches, is more consistent with a volcano. So I would refer you to that paper.
You know, okay, I guess I don't quite buy that argument. It just, they look like scree surfaces, I mean, tailless. So it's like the whole thing, the top part of Ahuna is like just lifted up.
That's what I think too. What I think is going on is that there's been, I mean, it's absolutely true. There is some evidence that there is a tail, sorry.
Now that doesn't, of course, say why does it form, and there must be some sort of heterogeneity in the mantle. You know, we see that at very large scale, at degree 2, probably.
Yeah, we have new observations that suggest that first there have been 2 layers of emplacement. There is I can show you pictures of during lunch where there is a discontinuity in composition across the dome. And it's also, there is some topography here that is just being analyzed and that might also be telling about the origin. My favorite scenario, and it might be crazy, is that because the brine, the relict ocean is freezing, there was an injection or extrusion of material very localized and rich in silicates. And that would explain why we have that very positive gravity anomaly centered right on the dome. That would be really an extrusion dominated by silicates and not by ice, as has been suggested in the Rouch paper.
Okay.
Julie, if that would be the explanation, the freezing of the relict ocean, why would there only be one such feature? Isn't
yeah,
that
I know.
sort of
it's annoying. So maybe there might be more first, and I hope, Mike, you can save me. And I think someone is going to talk about the, I mean, surface temperature is very cold, and in order to have material extruded, we need to break the crust. And I think there is a talk later today about enabling the exposure of material by fracturing the crust. And so it might be that there are only a few places where, that there might be material upwelling from below in multiple places, but it can be exposed only locally due to special circumstances like a fracture network. No, we don't see fractures. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a very good point. There are variations. Here the crust is, I think, 35 kilometers. Mike, you've been working on that. Yeah, it's about 35 kilometers here, and